Good morning, Professor Reed. Hope all is well. Today, it's a summer class, first week. Hopefully, you got the introductions done and you read over the piece Digital Maoism, which, isn't the best written piece in terms of like an academic paper. Mr. Lanier wrote it. I would say, though, that, we shouldn't really look at it as an academic piece, but the main idea is that reading that, we're gonna sort of like think about or the ideas that you're thinking about putting in sources, how you can make something that's got a lot of good material into a more academic paper. But to be fair to the writer, we're almost looking at a different genre of writing. And, I've used that digital Maoism piece for multiple years, and it still resonates even today in 2024. I think it was written in 2006. So think about that, where you were at in 2006. A lot has changed, but it is what it is. Okay, now what I want to do today is I want to talk about how to do the proposal and give you a little bit of a little information on the actual essay. As I mentioned before in the first, the introduction, this is a very quick semester. We're packing a lot in, keep up with things. What I'll try to do throughout the semester, if I see somebody falling behind, I will try to reach out to you and touch base with you. I know a lot of people have sent me accommodation letters, which is great. If you got an accommodation letter, make sure you send it to me. I'll put it on file. And as I grade, if I do make a mistake with that, please just put a note in the comment section on Canvas. Communication is key. And, best of luck throughout the semester. Now, this will be the first essay we do. Remember, we're going to do 3 essays in this summer semester. Oh my gosh, it's going to be jam-packed, but we're going to try to keep up the momentum. And basically all 3 of the essays have to go together. So as I describe this, I'll sort of talk about the 3 essays and how you can, figure them out. What you have to do for this first essay is you have to create a proposal. So we're gonna talk about this idea of discourse community by a writer named John Swales, and you're gonna try your best to determine a specific discourse community you can look at. Then you want to go into Canvas. You want to download the blank. It's called Discourse Community Proposal. Download that and then fill it out for your specific community you're looking at. Okay. Now, in addition, you have to also interview 2 people related to the discourse community. And what I'll do is, as I talk about this, I'll try to explain what some students have done in the past. And, this idea is a little bit, PhD Englishy in that sort of sense. However, I do think it's a good fit for, like a 202 A or B class, social sciences, that sort of thing. So let me get into it. Okay, yeah, so here he is, and his name is John Swales, and he wrote a piece back in, I want to say, either the 80s or the 90s, and he walked everybody through what is a discourse community. Now, he believed that these communities interacted with each other, and over time this has evolved. Some people feel like this is an antiquated sort of idea. Now, I've used it for years because I feel like it gives an opportunity for people to write about basically anything they want, and I'll show you some examples of this. And then you're going to take this proposal, analyze your discourse community. We're going to try to take this proposal and turn it into the actual paper. So the proposal is forming almost like your topic sentences for the essays. So what I'll do is I'll post examples of paragraphs that students have written. As I said earlier, I'll probably use some lectures from previous classes. I'll intermingle them. I'm always trying to update, but I made this specifically for the summer class as well. So this idea of discourse community has 6 characteristics. So A, you want to determine what discourse community you can look at. And then B, you want to think about how you can develop these other essays as well. I'll talk about that. And then you're going to answer, well, basically what I did was I created a proposal. You're going to download the blank proposal and fill it in for your discourse community. Now, for this first essay, we actually don't need to have academic sources per se. We'll focus on that a little bit more in the second essay. And you're going to basically look at this idea of discourse community, and he basically, you can think of it as sort of like a subculture, or now I have a tendency to like conspiracy theories. That's what I teach my O15 class on, so you can gravitate towards that. I find that probably half the students write about conspiracy theories or a conspiratorial group. Now, what you don't want to do, like we'll talk about this in a second. Say you want to look at the flat earthers. For this first essay, you're writing a more informative essay that's trying to look at almost like an anthropological study of them. Okay, so do they have common goals? How do they intercommunicate with members? How do they give feedback? A lot of times these groups are going to be found online. Do they use specific genre for communication? So are they using like a specific mode of communication? Do they have specific language? And is there a threshold for membership or expertise in their field? Now, you could look at a discourse community that is more occupational. You could look at psychologists, you could look at social sciences, or you can go sort of conspiratorial. We'll talk about a few of those. Flat earthers. Somebody once, a couple semesters ago, did Bigfoot. People that are really into Bigfoot. Really fascinating. Or you could look at like sort of cults, or you could look at like intense fan bases. I had a few papers on like Swifties last semester. Now remember, you don't have to use academic sources, but as you go into the next two essays, you'll have to look at like the sources surrounding the group, and the last essay is a cause and effect essay. So if you look at my YouTube page, I do have some videos up about that as well if you want to get a sort of a feel for it. Okay, so what you want to do for this week is you want to determine a discourse community, then look at these ideas, right? What are their common goals? How do they communicate? What type of feedback do they give to each other? So you can look at sort of inner and outer feedback in the group. What ways do they communicate? Do they have a distinct vocabulary? And do they have members of different status? Okay, so if you looked at, certain music genres, right? I once had a paper on punk rock. I looked at punks, and I've had a few on like people that were metalheads, right? So you would try to take these ideas and sort of break them down. Okay. Now, I also have had a few papers on people that are fascinated with serial killers. You probably remember the Dahmer miniseries. It was out a couple years ago. There was an uptick in people that were really into like serial killers, and you could look at people that are into true crime. So although I'm going to focus on like some groups that are conspiracy, some that aren't, they don't have to be necessarily conspiracy theory. I would say probably the biggest group I've ever had done is vegans. I don't want to say anybody's a vegan is a conspiracy theorist, but so it doesn't necessarily have to be. Okay, so you're going to take these. So you want to determine what your discourse community is. Remember, it's almost like a subculture that has these very specific values, ways of communicating, inner communication, outer communication, different status, members different status, and you're going to try to break those down in your paper. Now, don't try to get it too, specific, and don't try to get it too broad. And then you can develop this idea of discourse community into two more argumentative papers. Okay, and then yes, I've broken this down a few times. Let me show you this. So what you'll see is there's going to be a proposal. It's going to be online, and you basically want to fill it in for your specific group. Try to make sure you answer all the questions for your discourse community. Use either APA or MLA. Now, we focus a lot more on APA in this class. I sort of like APA better, but use APA 7 or MLA 9 for the paper. But for the proposal, you don't have to have this in APA or MLA. Okay, so, but you do want to put some links in there that you can reference. So remember, for this, I think sometimes the students get really sort of paranoid about this proposal. As you move forward in your academic career, you're probably making proposals for your specific, whatever you're going to write. If you want to write a PhD, you write a proposal for that. This isn't that intense. It's just trying to collect your ideas together. It's almost a form of like a rough outline. Okay. And then write a brief summary, how they're related to the ideas, and then to the general audience members, the proposal is understandable. So you want to keep that in mind as well. And then you'll answer these specific questions in the proposal. Does the group share a common vocabulary? And what makes it different from the self? Does the group have common behaviors and goals? What are they? Does the group share common goals and assumptions? And what are they? What are the beliefs? How and when or do these members of the group usually communicate with each other? Okay, and you're looking at sort of like the structure of their communication. And then does the group have a threshold for membership? So, if you looked at like something like cardiologist, they would have threshold for membership. But, something like a cult, I don't know they necessarily, well, yeah, a cult would probably have degrees of membership. But I don't think like veganism has a structure through their membership. Now, you can also look at religious groups. Me personally, I have a really deep interest in like Mormon history. I'm really fascinated with Mormonism. However, I'm not Mormon, but I've had a few papers on that as well. I would not call them a cult. However, fundamentalist Mormon, I would call them a cult. So there's a difference there. And what are the rules? How they carry them out? How they enforce them? So what you want to do is like download the blank proposal. Remember, you're not going to care if it's MLA perfect or APA perfect, but you're going to try to fill these in for your specific discourse community, and then you're going to develop these ideas in the paper. Okay. And if you got a question about a specific discourse community, shoot me an email. I'll try to get some Zoom hours as well over the weekend at some point. Yeah, my son's got a baseball game. Yeah, so we'll figure it out, but shoot me an email if you got any questions about like your specific discourse meeting. Okay, now let me give you some examples. I'll post these as well. So I once had, and once again, what I love about the paper of discourse, maybe used it for a couple years, is that it opens up really interesting opportunities, and we're gonna hope that different students write about different things. You can sort of like also, if you got a research focus, depending on your major, maybe you can have a chance to sort of explore that, right? So there's a lot of flexibility with it. Now, some of these get a little bit conspiratorial. Some of these do get controversial. And one of these is the RCTA group, and it's a group that was on TikTok that wanted to basically change their race to another race, and there was a whole community on TikTok. Now, I can remember the student, her name was Rose, great job with this paper, and if I'm not mistaken about it, very focused like almost like a K-pop type of community. So I want to say these are people that want to imitate, appropriate, I guess is the right word, more East Asian culture. Now, don't quote me on this. What I love about being a writer and a professor of writing is I'm sort of an expert in nothing. We sort of talk about a lot of things, but this is a fascinating group, and it has a TikTok, Reddit side to it. Now, me personally, as a writer, I like the subject matters that gravitate towards a little bit more pop culture, a little bit internet based, and you can see here that she did a really good job of looking at the specific vocabulary that this group used. And you can see here, doesn't necessarily have to be perfectly MLA, APA. You're just sort of explaining it. And then we're going to hope that by looking at these, we can develop these into the specific paragraphs in the essay. So the proposal is going to lead to the paragraph. Now, Rose's next paper looked at the concept of cultural appropriation. And then her final paper was like, what is the cause of this as well? So it's cause and effect. Okay. And then I basically break down, or what I did was I took screenshots of her specific proposal. And if I'm not mistaken, they physically change themselves and they sort of like embrace other cultural norms as well. Fascinating group from a psychological perspective. Okay, good. Now the next one that I put an example of is Satanism. I just turned 50 this year. It's an amazing experience getting older, but I can remember the satanic panic of years ago, and back in the 80s, I grew up in Virginia. It was a pretty religious area. I would say a lot of Southern Baptists there. Great people, However, me personally, I wasn't too religious. But there was like a panic about Satanism at the time. So, and if you're familiar with like a show like Stranger Things, sort of plays with it. So this student specifically looked at Satanists. Now, her next paper turned into a paper that was on, like what her last paper was what caused this sort of satanic panic. and she sort of compared it to other types of like panics that are going on. Okay, which I think we'll talk about in a second as well. But yeah, so she looked at this sort of idea of Satanism. Okay, and then here's her background information. Now, one of the things you want to just sort of think about for this is that you are going to have to interview somebody, so you'd want to be aware of this. Now, the interviews can be done online. I'll have a whole post about that next week. They can be done online. There's something that you can, conduct over email if you want to. You only have to ask them 3 questions. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. And then now another one I had last semester, student, his name was Patrick, great student. He looked at drag queen culture, and particularly looked at sort of like RuPaul drag show. I don't want to say that that's necessarily the quintessential, drag personification, but it is one that I think in terms of like general pop culture, we are pretty aware of. Okay, so we looked at drag culture, did a really good job in his proposal, looking at some specific terminology that they use. Now, you can look at groups that are in the LGBT sphere. So as I said earlier, like I know I talked about conspiracy theory. That's not necessarily some sort of a conspiracy theory. And you could look at just groups that are like certain type of psychology groups. I once had a student did a great paper on Jungian psychology. Trying to think of some other non-conspiratorial. And I mean, you could look at like ADHD support groups. That's a really good one. And different types of learning environment. You could look at certain types of educators. There's a multitude of different things you could look at for this as well. Okay. And remember, you're going to interview 2 people for the paper. And then there's just another example of like, you can pause and look at it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually post these online so you can look at it. Okay, now one I found really interesting is going to be a group called, well, no, not called. They're going to be funeral directors, right? So for years, I've thought this would be a great fit for the paper. I know a few people that are involved with the industry, and it's super fascinating. So I had a student named Amanda. She did a really good job on funeral directors. Now, she also was studying, she was a marketing major, and she was going to then go after school for her funerary arts degree and was going to actually enter the practice. Okay, so she looked at funerary sciences. So this example here shows that it's more occupational, right? Now, I guess in terms of like conspiracy theories, there could be a conspiracy that, it's a money-making scheme or something like that, right? But it's not inherently conspiratorial. And she basically looked at, mortuary sciences, broke down the information. Okay. And remember, you can put some links in here. We want to make this more just like free-form brainstorming, but then you're going to try to take this and develop it in to your specific, community. And for morticians and funerary directors, there is a pretty big membership hierarchy compared to other groups. Okay. And, like every so often, there'll be some practices by somebody that make the news, right? So there's going to be ways of getting kicked out of the group as well. Okay. So remember, you're taking this idea of discourse community, then applying. Okay. And I want to say her last paper was on this sort of evolution to eco burials, like how like there's now a movement towards like almost like people getting buried in very specific ways that doesn't have embalming, and it's much more like eco-friendly. Very good. Now, I had another paper. I've had actually 2 papers on this recently about bird watching, competitive bird watching. And I had a student at Penn State last spring, Sarah, that did a really good job on bird watching. And then I have a student over at LaSalle. I'm an adjunct, so I'm in multiple schools. So I had a student named Sean Bradley, amazing guy, just impressive student. Read a really good paper on bird watching, like bird watching, and it was something he's actively involved with bird watching. So you can write about something you're involved with, but we don't want to make this necessarily a personal paper. And you can see here he like sort of broke down the different type of vocabulary, and he put a link there as well. So I didn't know there was so much specific terminology for bird watching, and you know what? It did get me like sort of like, I don't know, aware of birds for a little while. I find it pretty fascinating. Okay, so bird watching. Now, another one here that I would say is pretty popular is going to be gym bro culture. So this is going to be one that I think is, you can look at influencers, you can look at gym bro culture, you can look at veganism, you can look at specific diets. I had a student last semester look at people that eat carnivore. I've had students do MMA as well. Like I've had students do that. Different types of sports, travel sports. If you played a sport, you could look at that as well. Certain type of fan bases you could look at, and this is looking at gym culture and sort of the growing. Some people would argue obsession with male body, and I think this was looking specifically at male body. Okay, and they looked at like all the different culture around that, and some of the assumptions. So you're taking these ideas and you're just sort of like putting them into the proposal. Now, some of these are some of the ones are going to be a little bit more conspiratorial. Flat earthers is a really interesting one. I've actually had multiple papers on flat earthers, and they're pretty good at like interviewing because you can email them, and we're gonna hope that your interview questions come out of your proposal, so it all ties together. So that's like one that's conspiratorial. I've actually never known somebody. I don't think that was like necessarily a flat earther, personally. Now, you've got also some that are going to be, political, right? So I always try to stress in my class, especially about conspiracy theories, I feel like both the left and the right, for that sort of false dichotomy that we have, is there are elements of conspiracy theories to it, right? So you definitely have January 6th, what happened there, some of the groups like QAnon, fascinating deep dive into um, that political ideology. And then there's been some on the left that have been very conspiracy oriented as well. Maybe some people have argued in my class that Bernie Sanders is sort of conspiratorial. Now you could also look at, if you wanted to get into it, you could look at the Palestinian Israeli conflict. That's not new in any, it's definitely not new, but it's definitely something that would be ongoing. You could look at that as well. So this does have sort of a journalistic type of feel to it. But like as I said, politically, I think there's going to be conspiracies on sort of both sides. Somebody in one of my classes looked at JFK assassinations, and they were like, well, Oswald was a Marxist. There's like going to be Marxist sort of conspiracies as well. But once again, keep in mind, some of these groups can be a little bit dangerous. Incels is another one that's definitely conspiratorial. If you're not familiar with them, sometimes I have students that aren't really familiar with them, and they're maybe like criminal justice majors, and they start to look at them and they go, wow, this is like so fascinating. I'm going to write a paper on this. And uh, your Chad Virgin Walker memes, their sort of obsession with the male body type and some of their terminology. And I want to say that, I'm blanking on the name of the individual that's there at the left, but I want to say he's like almost like a form of like an idol for the incel group. Now, you could also look, I don't want to lump groups in the manosphere together, right? I don't want to look at like that together. But, certain groups that maybe follow like an Andrew Tate type of philosophy could be they're on the manosphere, type of thing, but you can almost look at like pickup artists or hookup culture. There's all sorts of things you could look at there as well. Okay. And then you got cults, you got Scientology, you got Heaven's Gate, you got um, just a multitude of different cults here. As I said, religion, I'm a big fan of religion. I'm a big fan of like Mormon history. I don't see them as a cult. Although some people said, any religion's a cult. But Scientology, one set of people on Jehovah's Witnesses, not saying they're a cult either. But Heaven's Gate, if you're familiar with them, so a few students have written about those, and this is going to develop into multiple papers as well. And then we got some of the more, hate-based groups. I don't want to. Once again, I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a sociologist. There's people that know so much more than me, and I try not to judge, and I definitely don't want to judge as I grade the paper. I try to follow the rubric. But there's a group like the Proud Boys, and there's also a group here called the Black Hebrew Israelites. Very specific group. I've had a few papers on. In fact, in the video that we'll watch for different types of paragraphs, there are a few students that read about them, and if I'm not mistaken, they have like a very specific view of like the 12 tribes of Israel, and a group like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is some people argue controversial. They have labeled them as a hate group. I want to say they've also labeled like the Proud Boys a hate group as well. Okay. And you got people that deny climate change. Okay, so this is going to be one that, is really fascinating. And just to give you a little history of the assignment, it came out of a class I taught at Rowan University that was looking specifically at conspiracy. Well, looking at climate change. We read a paper on conspiracy theories, anti-vaxxers, which is a really interesting group, historically and currently. Once again, not going to judge a group. There's some people that, very, very specific about it. And, you know, um, whatever angle. Remember, for this paper, you're not actually judging them. The second paper, you would actually write your position. People that deny the Holocaust. Ooh, I mean, this is controversial. Anything like we're talking about groups that are more conspiratorial, right? So obviously, if you tackle that one, that is going to be something that you would not want to take lightly because it's very controversial. And then finally, we got people that believe in aliens, and as I said before, Bigfoot, Chupacabra is another one. You could look at people. So the idea of the paper is, I want to keep this to a half hour, is that you're taking this idea of discourse community, you're choosing a specific one, and then you're going to take the proposal, going to download it, look at some of the examples. You're not trying to make this super APA MLA. Just throw some links there, try to brainstorm a moment, get it uploaded. I'll go through and sort of approve it, and then we'll talk about taking the proposal and turning it into the actual essay. So hopefully that helped out. Any questions, email me. Talk to you soon.